Hey kids, and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about Lent. So today is Ash Wednesday, and I was talking to my children this morning before they got on the bus about what that meant. And the reason I was talking about that this morning is because Mass happens to be at noon, which is when they're in school, and at 7 o'clock at night, which is when we're doing bedtime. Ash Wednesday is not a holy day of obligation, as a lot of people say. And it's really interesting because Ash Wednesday is one of those days that we have a lot of people just head to the churches. And it's a great service to go. Ash Wednesday is like no other time of the year. It's actually one of the days of the year that we have the largest attendance. Some people say it's Easter, Christmas, many churches, it's Ash Wednesday. And the reason is because the outward sign that is the ashes on the forehead. A lot of Protestant churches have also started to do ashes on Ash Wednesday. It's a great symbol to remind us who we belong to. The old story, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. From ashes you have come, from ashes you will return. Those kind of statements are what we were raised with. And the idea that we are something as insignificant as this dust, or this matter that we're putting on our foreheads. But because we belong to the risen God, we have more, and we can be more. So then we get this outward symbol to say we are this tribe. This is the one time a year where Catholics especially wear their faith out in public. Catholics tend to be a little more reserved in sharing their faith, some for good reason and some for the obvious. They just don't want to talk about religion, or they're not very educated. So, like I was saying, Ash Wednesday is not a holy day of obligation. It's a day that we give away something free. I know that sounds silly because literally what we're giving away free are ashes. And where a church is supposed to get those ashes, I hope this is what your parish is doing. But during Palm Sunday, those palms that are given out are returned to the church. And then the church will burn those ashes or burn those palm leaves that were used the previous year and use those ashes for Ash Wednesday. So the church has been recycling for years and years and years. That's the joke. Recycle, recycle, recycle. New chair squeaking a little bit. Apologize. So we get this symbol that talks about, Christ is coming into the city. They're dropping these palm leaves. We're like, yeah, Jesus, Jesus. And then we celebrate the crucifixion. I don't know why we celebrate the crucifixion, but that kind of tends to be what you see happening in some churches today. The celebration should always be that meal, the Eucharist. But we tend to glorify the crucifixion. And it's because the crucifixion was ugly and it was disgusting. And we're going to have some meditations hopefully done before the end of the Lenten year this year that you will be able to pop in. But we tend as Catholics to focus this next 40 days on the pain and suffering of Christ. And that is definitely a place that can lead to some great meditation and some great value. Here's where I caution you. Oftentimes it is easy to fall into this need to see the pain. And sometimes it's because we have pain within our own bodies and our own souls. And it's easy to say, wow, Jesus, he was perfect and all this happened to him. So it's okay for me to have these pains. And so people delve into that. And then that becomes their spirituality. Their spirituality comes from a place of sorrow. And that can be okay if you can spring forth joy from it. And that's the tricky part of Lent and your Lenten journey. So what do we do during Lent? What we do is we do abstinence, we do fasting. There's differences, okay? Abstinence means like no meat. I'm not doing that. Fasting means I'm going to not do that today. Or I'm not going to do that for a set amount of time. What you hear most people say is, I'm giving up something for Lent. And that is where we lose a lot of people. Because the things that people give up for Lent, and aside from crazy things, like, because most people will say, well, I'm going to give up murdering people for Lent. And that's obviously dumb, because it's not a sacrifice. And some people say, well, I'm going to give up chocolate for Lent, or I'm going to give up coffee for Lent, or I'm going to get whatever it is. They're going to give up something. And some people say, well, I'm just going to add something. I'm going to pray every day at this time during Lent. And so everybody has their interpretation of what a Lenten sacrifice is. So here's Dad's interpretation. And this is what I was talking to my young daughter about this morning before she got on the bus. We were talking about, what are we going to give up? And she was asking, like, well, what do you mean give up? Like, and I am not the kind of dad that's just going to say, just stop eating chocolate. I'm not going to tell her what to give up. So we had a discussion. I said, this year it's not super important because you're learning, so let's do something simple. And I was like, I don't want to tell you to give up candy, because candy, and her eyes just kind of went, And I said, but what if we just gave up sour candy? And she got really upset. And she's like, no, I don't want to give up sour candy. And I said, okay. But you don't want to give up sweet candy, because most of the candy we have is sweets. And she says, I'll give up sweet candy. I don't want to give up sour candy. And so I said, let's back up a little bit. Let's get into the spirit of what the sacrifice needs to be. And I said, Kiara, what you are doing is something that's going to happen to you every day that's going to remind you to pray. It's going to remind you to be with Jesus. So if you give up candy, if you go to grab candy, you can say, oh, I'm not supposed to have that candy because I gave it up. And it's a promise, and that's between you and God and no one else. And I said, but since this is your first year, how about we do something together? And that's why I suggested sour candy. And long story short, she said, well, what do I eat today? And I said, honey, let's talk a little bit more about Ash Wednesday and about what Lent is going to be this afternoon. And today for lunch, I want you to do one thing. Right before you eat, I want you to say an extra prayer today for your friends. And then we'll talk about what you're going to give up later. And just about that moment, the bus shows up. And we put her on the bus, or I put her on the bus, and gave her a big old hug. And Dad said, I can't wait till afternoon. And she proudly sported the ashes on her forehead as she stepped onto the bus and showed her bus driver that she had been ashed. And he looked at me because my 6-year-old had done it same to me. And he said, you got a big old spot on your head. And I said, it's Ash Wednesday. And he looked back at the kids, he looked at me and smiled. And it's just a great way to share our faith. Well, let me get back into where the pitfalls are. We start thinking that this sacrifice is more important than this sacrifice, that's more important than this sacrifice. And in reality, the sacrifice is the least important part of the Lenten sacrifice. The most important part is that journeying towards Christ, that journeying towards our Creator. Because if you give up sodas and you just start drinking more coffee, and that's it, then what good is Easter when you're celebrating the resurrection of God? I squealed. You have to prepare yourself for great things. We save up for things we want to buy if we're responsible. Oftentimes we think that we can get credit in our faith. And while that might be true in certain churches, when it comes to your spirituality, you can't get credit. That spirituality and that relationship with God has to be every day, regardless of what flavor church you belong to. I belong to the Catholic Church. I'm very happy with the Catholic, well, not totally happy with the Catholic Church, but I'm pretty happy with the Catholic Church. It's a beautiful faith. What I'm not happy with is some of the leadership within the Catholic Church, because some things don't make sense. And when someone says just because, I don't like it. The good thing about our church is we have this beautiful book called the Catechism that has our rules in it. So when you hear something that's kind of funky, I like that I can go to the book and say, yeah, that particular minister, priest, teacher, whatever, said something, and I can see how they can interpret that differently than that, but it's a beautiful faith because it's got bells, it's got smells, it's got, I'm talking about incense and literal bells, and you've got the robes and the stained glass and all the beauty. And then we have the people. And that is where every church falls short. Because the type of people that need to be in the pews are not typically the type of people that you want to be friends with. We try to surround ourselves by people that are like us. And then we forget that there are a lot of people out in the world that are in different places. One of the great things about the Catholic Church when we first started, this is 2,000 years ago, almost, just really close, is it was supposed to be universal. Everyone was welcome. And that's typically how any organization starts. We need numbers. Everyone's welcome. Catholic is the word. The word means universal. And that's why Catholic, small c Catholic, is in the Apostles' Creed that a lot of other faiths still recite today. We believe in one holy universal church. Apostolic. Somewhere along the line, we forgot what Pentecost was. Pentecost said we must go out and teach people in their tongues, in their words. You know, we talk about the fire of Pentecost coming onto the apostles, and they had these tongues of fire, and they were able to speak, and the people heard them in their own native tongue. That is as simple as immersing yourself into a group of people. And that's what the early church was called to do. Immerse themselves into the people and speak their language. And teach the church's values to the people. And somewhere it got a little wonky. And I'm not saying that I know the answers. But the truth is this. Giving up soda or coffee or Slim Jims or beef jerky or cigarettes or all that stuff doesn't matter if you're just pissed about it. And I said kind of a bad word. But if you're just pissed about it for 40 days and you complain, then your rewards are here. That's scriptural. But if you say, I'm going to make sure that I spend some time with God in my sacrifice through these 40 days, you're going to come out on the other side a better person. And it doesn't matter what that sacrifice is. Maybe you say, I'm giving up this cigarette. I gave up cigarettes a long time ago, so it's real easy to do this. So I gave up these cigarettes. I'm going to give up these cigarettes for Lent. So what do? You give them up, you're angry. No, you give them up and you take that time that you would have smoked that cigarette, that time that you would have gone out onto the porch and said, I just smoked a cigarette. So you smoke coffee, or you drink coffee and smoke a cigarette on the porch. Instead of smoking that cigarette, pull out your rosary. Pull out a prayer book, pull out your Bible, and take that time and say, you know what? I hate that I can't smoke this cigarette, or I can't drink this energy drink. That was the big one for me. Or this cup of coffee. But I'm going to spend time reading the Bible. I'm going to spend time praying. The reason I say read the Bible is because most of us don't read the Bible. And if we have, we don't read it again. When you read the Bible, the beauty of it is, when you read it as a child, it says one thing. And when you read it as an adult, it says something else. And then when you read it as a parent, it says something else. And then when you read it as a grandparent, it says something else. The words don't have to change for culture to change. But also, we don't have to change our values to accept others where they're at. I am glad to say that what a person's religion is usually the last thing I ask about a person. Because their relationship with the Creator may be so much closer to Him than mine. I don't know. I do know that if your church says, we have it right and they don't, you might want to look for another church. And when I say that, I'm talking, we've got a bunch of little churches within the Catholic Church. There are some people that say this church is right, but that church isn't. Just Catholic to Catholic. Know that the person that's pointing fingers and being accusatory is typically the one doing something a little strange. Not always, but sometimes. So during your Lenten journey, start to think of the joy that can come out of the sacrifice, the simple sacrifice. The sacrifice of, I'm giving this up, and I'm going to give that time that I used on that to God. So, rather than give up something that is a vice, which is something that a lot of people do, I want to give up cigarettes. That's the example. Give up something that's not a vice, that doesn't affect anyone else, and that may bring you even closer to God. So what do I mean by that? Perhaps, I don't know. What do you do that's not a vice every day? Well, a cup of coffee? Not necessarily a vice you want to give up. A cup of coffee in the morning isn't a bad thing. But if I gave it up for 40 days, I'd probably notice pretty quickly. Or maybe it could just be as simple as, instead of putting honey in my coffee, I just drink it black for 40 days. See, the sacrifices don't have to be outward for everyone else to see. They have to be inward for us to see. And for us to take a moment and say, I'm a sinner. I don't have it all right, but I'm going to keep trying. And today's another day, and so will tomorrow be. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun.